with 24 hours a day. Organize your day. Work hard. I'm here to talk about success.
Welcome to the show. Today's guest brings a unique blend of engineering precision, business strategy, and human-centered leadership to the table. Michael Ignaffo is a veteran executive, leadership advisor, and author who spent over 25 years navigating high-stake environments. From the heart of automotive industry to the evolving frontiers of healthcare and organizational consulting. After decades in technical and operational roles, Michael co-founded Wayfinding, a consultancy focused on helping companies build better, more intentional workplaces, and Windows Health Clinic, where he brings fresh approach to wellness and care. Along the way, he's developed what some might call an electric theory of leadership. Not in the physics sense, but in the way powerful energy flows through teams when clarity, culture, and communication are aligned. Michael is also the co-author of the book, Building Better Workplaces, The Fundamentals of Organizational Effectiveness, a practical guide to making organizations not just more efficient, but more human. Let's get in, brother. First off, thank you so much for sending me this book, and I'll cue in on the book. And for your kind words, I have been able to already dig into the book, and it has been transformative already, in such a quick time. In your book, you break down the key ingredients of workplace effectiveness, and this is early in the book, right? From communication styles to coaching, from succession planning to the way culture intersects with brand. Let's dive into some of those fundamental or foundational ideas. What does it really mean to have an effective organization in today's world, and where do most companies get it wrong?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Joshua. It's great to chat with you. I appreciate you not making the background sound like a memorial service. Otherwise, I would have had to cut it off. For me, effective organizations really lie in the hands of the management ranks. Yep. And it is altogether common, frankly, a cliche to sort of recognize that, not due to any bad intention or malfeasance, but just necessity, we often look to our star individual contributors to create managers. Right. But when we do that and people go from being individual contributors to actually having a multiplying effect on the resources assigned to them, we overnight, they don't magically, just inherit the skills or the knowledge about what employees need from their managers and how to align them, communicate with them, inspire them, motivate them, engage them, right. Get the most out of them, and convince them that the more valuable the employees' contributions are, the more value the employer can show employees in terms of compensation. Right. We've taught, whereas culture comes very much from the top of an organization and then cascades down, the effectiveness of an organization, made by engaged and aligned employees really happens more in the middle of the organization, right, where the managers lie.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you just touched on that, because that's what was going through my head as you touched on like the ineffectiveness. Can you touch on where or why it's overlooked the type of impact that middle management may have, not only as it relates to ineffectiveness, but just the opportunity cost?
Sure. I think, not to broad brush it too badly, but there's a little bit of a lack of awareness or taking for granted that someone who's been managed for years can automatically turn around and be a manager of others. But it takes more care than that. There are skills associated with it. There are techniques associated with it. The good news, so if the bad news is we're not born with it, and we really do have an opportunity cost to not deliberately building those skills in our managers, the good news is they're not that difficult. They're powerful yet simple. So the opportunity cost is that we fail to build the followership in employees. We fail to build the trust. We misstep. And again, with good intentions, we end up cultivating an attitude of self-centeredness among employees versus the what can I do for the company, because I trust the more valuable I am to my manager, the more value will be shown in me and the more of a future I have. Managers can cultivate that different orientation, and it makes all the difference. It can turn into competitive advantage, and in fact, not even a doubt about it. It's assured. We just need to be sure that we're giving employees what they need.
Right. You touched on the skills that management can master or need. What are some of those skills that from a foundational standpoint, no matter what industry you in, that managers should master?
Some of the key ones are really communication related. For example, feedback. None of us is perfect.
Right.
Well, at least where I presently am. I'll leave the contingent in Texas right now as a question, but managers are responsible. It's incumbent on the managers to actually help employees polish, gain more experience, be stretched, and know where they have misstepped, right? Know where their possible derailers are. But feedback tends to have a negative connotation. When someone sits down and says, "Hey, I have feedback for you," it isn't uncommon for us to get a little nervous. One skill that I like to share with managers is if you are building the muscle memory to be giving 5 times more feedback than criticism, then the criticism can be well received, and it is not undermining employee confidence nor undermining the relationship between the employee and the manager. It demonstrates that the manager is being observant in a thorough way, because employees tend to do much more right than they do wrong.
Right.
When managers think that their job is to only call out the negatives, then that has an erosion of trust. It has an erosion of the credibility of the manager, and it comes across as this person has selective awareness of me because he or she is not actually calling out all the positives of what I'm doing.
Yeah, right.
So that feedback is one. It's easy. That right there. That's a powerful lesson for managers. Another one, you can cut me off after this example, but there are other examples similarly easy yet similarly powerful. Is where development actually has the biggest bang. I'm a huge believer that employees who have headroom, right, have potential, have a desire to grow, do not need to be sent away from their job in order to capitalize on that potential. My favorite technique for managers is to say, "Hey, managers, you're getting home late to dinner on a regular basis. What are the things that are overloading your plate of tasks or responsibilities that you could confidently delegate down to your employees who ought to be developed?" You can't just toss it over the wall without providing support for these new tasks, because things are going to be new to the employees. They're going to need some support. But if you can get back 50% of the bandwidth that it would have taken to do those things yourself, or 70% of that bandwidth, you are building your own scalability, maybe to get home in time for dinner, or maybe to do more for your own manager, right? The employee is therefore now doing something that is higher level work just organically because it came off the manager's plate.
Right.
If communicated as such, the employee can feel appreciated, and developed, that there's belief in the employee to do more. At the same time, the manager is getting more scalable. The employee's not taken out of the job to gain that development. It's not like you're sending them off for some week-long workshop where everybody else on the team has to pick up the slack. So it's business relevant coming off the manager's plate, and If that approach is being used, across the organization, it's like a rising tide lifts all boats up to the CEO level, who is getting, more taken off of her plate or more taken off of his plate because the organization beneath is scaling.
Yes, I mean, spot on. These are great nuggets. One thing I want to touch on really quick is the difference between feedback and criticism, because you mentioned, if I have 4 or 5 feedbacks, it's not as bad if I give you one criticism. Can you give us an example of like the difference, or care to share your definition of the two?
Yeah, happy to do that. Feedback, I would say, is sort of an umbrella term where there can be positive reinforcement or kudos, and also criticism. um, if I'm offering sort of two answers to this, or a two-part answer to this, I like practicing the start of a compliment with, "Hey, I have some feedback for you." I model this, with people I work with cross-functionally. I teach this to managers. Hopefully they apply it. I show it to my own employees. "Hey, I have some feedback for you. That was a really great presentation. I thought you nailed the salient points, and I thought that the presentation materials were without flaw." When you start, "Hey, I have some feedback for you," the expectation is a negative is to follow. If we practice having a positive follow, right? If we force ourselves before giving a compliment, which we usually don't practice proceeding with, "Hey, I have some feedback with you." If you actually practice adding that intro in, "I have some feedback for you," then have the compliment follow, it starts to build that muscle memory. That feedback can be both positive and negative. And we start to whittle away from the expectation of feedback always being critical. I did this with our controller in my present workplace right now. And I said, "Hey, I have some feedback for you." The person on my team in HR who works most closely with finance said she has gotten far fewer hysterical crisis emails from finance since you started. And this controller's eyes teared up. He had not received that kind of accolade since starting, and his expectation was of criticism. When I took him aside to say, "Hey, I want to offer you a little feedback," he was expecting me to give him some course correction, right? The other part of this two-part answer is I ask managers to, if they have criticism, to pause and think through 5 things to positively reinforce in the same conversation. And I tell those managers, if you can't do it, it could be you really are looking at that employee through a filter of criticism. There may be something blocking you from actually observing all the good that employee is doing, because I am confident across the board that it's at least a 5-to-1 ratio of things people are doing right to wrong. And again, building that muscle memory. "Hey, I really like the way you do this report. I really like the way you structure your emails. That communication was really terrific. Hey, I didn't particularly care that you went around me to my superior when, sharing this insight. I would have preferred to be copied." With a 5-to-1 ratio of positives to negatives, the employee doesn't feel hopeless at the end of that, and doesn't feel as though they're part of a witch hunt.
Interesting. Wow. That's deep. Now, I feel like that can not only save organizations, but that could save some relationships. You should write you should write a relationship book next. But
oh well, yeah.
Are you working on
one? No. I was actually going to say there'd be quite a humorous reaction to that, I think, if someone heard the suggestion.
Oh, really? Oh, hey. Well, you heard it here first. But yeah, you emphasize the value of effective, one-on-ones and ongoing dialogue. How can leaders structure these conversations to avoid it being transactional?
Oh, I love that. So one-on-ones and ongoing dialogues, I'm going to just distinguish between those two simply in terms of frequency. A one-on-one is, "Hey, I needed this done. Is it on track? I asked you to do this last week. Are we on track to getting it done? Do you need any help?" how's the job doing? It's, that could be like a weekly or bi-weekly check-in. Hey, I said I was going to do this for you. I wanted to give you a status update, right? That exchange of value between manager and employee goes both ways. And we should keep our commitments. The ongoing dialogue is the phrase I use for something that might happen more on like a quarterly or semi-annual basis. I do tend to like quarterly, but the point being, it is a slightly different conversation that goes to a slightly different level of detail. And I would be gesturing with my hands to give a visual, but I like sort of thinking of this in terms of a 3-circle Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. The way to structure it is for managers and employees to pursue sort of a calibrated shared understanding of what the employee is particularly good at, what the employee feels rewarded by, the kind of work the employee finds interesting, and what the business needs out of that employee's headcount. Hey, employee, we assigned you a desk, we purchased you a computer, we gave you a chair even to sit down in. Here's what we need out of those resources and your salary. You're a part of the finance team. We need your contribution to closing the books once a month. That's the business need out of your headcount. And probably a host of other things. If we think of like a job description, right, or a job posting, mm-hmm. all those duties, tasks, responsibilities, those things are articulating the business need out of a role.
Right.
Now, position descriptions are obsolete pretty quickly after they're published because businesses are dynamic places and jobs are ever evolving, right? Tend to wrap around the employee.
Right.
But if you think about all the things a business needs out of its employees, and you're looking for one employee's ideal job, ultimately, to be the subset of those business needs that the business needs out of all of its employees to get the work done, overlaid or intersecting with what the employee is competent at mm-hmm. or great at, and what the employee finds fun, to use, sort of a simple term, what the employee finds rewarding.
Right.
Those three things, the intersection of those three things, I would say is the employee's ideal job. The ongoing dialogue, that quarterly conversation between a manager and employee, is to keep up with what those three things contain, because they are ever evolving. Hey, employee, what do you think you're particularly good at? This is what I, the manager, your manager, think you're good at. What do you find fun? This is what I see as your manager, you getting a lot of energy around. And these are the things I need you to do. And if there are things that fall, if some of the things I'm asking you to do fall outside of that circle of things you find interesting to work on, well, maybe there's another teammate who can pick those things up in exchange for that teammate surrendering tasks that are less rewarding or in mm-hmm. less competent hands that you can take on, right? And we get to take our teams and kind of balance the workload and the assignments so that the right people are working on things where they're firing on all cylinders.
Right.
I'm going to say it another way. If you look at what 2 out of 3 would be in the 3 circles, again, like what the employee's good at, what the employee finds fun in the work, and what the business needs. If the employee's good at something that the business needs, but it's not fun, that comes across like a chore to the employee. Right. You might not get the most inspired work if you're assigning chores to the employees. Now, we get the paycheck, right? Sometimes we do things that are not fun because we need to do them, but if you can balance and try to optimize the job to have less chore work, less drudge activity, you're going to get more inspired, energized work from that person and from your whole team in aggregate. If the employee has something that's fun that the business needs, but that employee is not competent, that's like a pipe dream, right? They could have fun doing it, but you're going to get flawed work because they're not good at it.
Right.
And just to finish it out, if an employee is doing something that's fun for that employee and the employee is competent at it, but it's not among the things the business needs from that headcount, well, that's a hobby, right? Nobody's going to pay me to play the guitar because my company doesn't need me to play the guitar. although I'm not really competent at it, so that's a bad example. Nobody's going to pay me to do dishes, right? I have this quirky thing. I'm fine doing dishes.
Okay.
I like it, and I'm excellent at it.
Nice.
My company doesn't need me to be a dishwasher. My company needs me to run HR. So that would be like a hobby.
Right.
2 out of 3 is not good enough. If you want each of your employees firing on all cylinders, over time, through an ongoing dialogue, aim to make that person's job a larger and larger intersection of those 3 things: the employee's talent, the employee's interest, and the business need, and your organization will fire on all cylinders.
Beautiful. And that sounds like a very, psychologically safe space to be in too. If you're an employee and you have like those 3, you're hitting off on all 3 of those, right? Like, cause you're being fulfilled at work. You feel like you're accomplishing, you're having fun, and then you're doing your job well. Those seem to create psychological safety. How would you advise leaders to create real psychological safety so that feedback and engagement surveys, turn into action rather than just performance arts or performance theater, if you will?
So it doesn't turn into kabuki theater.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes, I do. So, quickly on the ongoing dialogue, if you think of like what a performance review intends to do, it's to like create dialogue between managers and employees, to allow feedback, and to keep an employee growing along a vector that makes that employee valuable to the company, and hopefully increasingly so. But we tend to get distracted by things like performance ratings, right? Real quick soundbite, Josh. If you ask a statistically significant population of employees whether they think they're in the top 25% of an organization, more than 25% of that group of employees will say yes. In fact, 80% of people will say yes to that.
Yeah.
If you ask them whether they think they're in the top half of the organization, 98% of people will say yes. So when you give someone a performance review, the stats imply you are going to be disappointing more than half the people. You are essentially demotivating people through the performance review process. My advice is do away with performance ratings, and in fact, formal performance reviews, which is just an anxiety-ridden, time-consuming conversation that ends up demotivating folks, and replace performance reviews and ratings with the ongoing dialogue, because you're actually achieving the same conversation, development, stretching of employees, feedback in a psychologically safe way. Taking the other part of your question around employee engagement surveys, that is really just a fantastic way, in my opinion. And yes, you mentioned my background. I'm somewhat of an analytical person. I love the opportunity to put some numbers into whether we're getting better engagement out of our employees, better emotional commitment, better willingness to put forth discretionary effort for the company's cause, whether employees feel the development that they're getting from their managers, especially if the managers are delegating downward off their own plates to the employees and communicating it not as, I'm tasking you, I'm punishing you with more work, but hey, I'm stretching you with work that I used to do myself. To run an employee engagement survey on some frequency is to measure whether you are getting the traction from those managers that you're teaching these skills to, these simple yet powerful skills to. So I suggest, if someone goes into an environment and wants to take on a different approach to HR and organizational effectiveness, that they run an employee survey as soon as possible and just see how terrible their baseline is. Because the worse that baseline is, the easier it is to show improvement the following year. Right. And then go out, teach managers, hold them accountable to actually using the concepts, talking with their employees, stretching them through developmental delegation, having the ongoing dialogues, and when giving feedback, making sure to emphasize all the positives so that the criticisms that keep people improving, addressing their flaws, their derailers, their shortcomings, are in the minority of those bullets. And over time, I predict that the engagement survey results will show the improvement that you are achieving through those methods. The actions are, for one, when you have an employee survey, be quick to show the results even before you've actually fully digested them. It takes very little effort to just be a mirror, right? Passively, hey, we asked you to give feedback and you gave it. Thank you so much for participating. Here's the data, here are the numbers. We're still interpreting it, but there's no reason we couldn't share the numbers with you while we interpret it and maybe choose some actions that will be taken in the future. That helps employees feel like, oh, wow, I took the survey and the feedback came back to me quickly, cause and effect, right? That encourages people to take the survey the following year. Then the actions, to me, I would go for things that are easier to finish and that are visible, even, tangible, over ambition of the actions. You don't want to take something on like, we're going to make everyone feel wealthier. That's an assured failure, right?
Right.
But hey, you said the lighting in the hallway to the break room was lousy. We're going to install new light fixtures.
Yeah.
And then come back to the employee and say, look, we got that feedback. We took action on it. Really appreciate it. We know we didn't solve every thorn in everyone's paw.
Right.
But this isn't a one-time event. We're going to do it year over year. So
Right.
the actions we're going to take are going to be few. They're going to be relatively easy to finish, and they're going to be visible. And then we're going to tie those actions back to the feedback you gave us so that you see it's a feedback loop. We're going to close that loop. And over time, participation is going to be maintained. The cynicism is going to remain low around the survey program. And it's just going to feel like a safe communication tool for managers to get feedback from employees that they're not comfortable sharing directly.
Right. I believe the corporate jargon is low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. I'll share something that that has occurred to me in my present environment.
Yeah.
Sort of learning the hard way. Low hanging doesn't necessarily mean easy.
Right. Right.
It means obvious.
Right. And achievable. Like you can accomplish that task. When you talk about developmental delegation, what does that mean? And like, how can leaders delegate in ways that build their team capabilities and not just, reduce their workload?
So if a manager, great question, thank you for that. If a manager is looking at her or his, list of tasks, especially the ones that are repeating, like, hey, every week I owe my own boss, this report, this summary, these bullets or these deliverables, and it's routine. As an example, look across the plate of things that one has to get done. When the ongoing dialogue is bearing fruit and the manager and employee have calibrated understandings of that ideal job for each employee on the team,
Right.
This employee is good at these things and really enjoys these things. Now, if I look at all the things on my own plate, what can I take off my plate to delegate to that employee that would intersect with the thing that the employee is good at and enjoys? That's employee number 1 on the team. Employee number 2 has a different set of notes associated with the ongoing dialogue. This employee number 2, whereas employee number 1 is really good at documents, employee number 2 is really good at spreadsheets, right? And they enjoy spreadsheets versus employee number 1 doesn't like math so much as words. I'm going to take my report writing and delegate it to employee number 1. I'm going to take my spreadsheet work, my analytics, my numbers reporting. I'm going to delegate that to employee number 2. I'm going to support these 2 employees in their new tasks. But because I've been selective and guided by my awareness of these employees and what their ideal jobs comprise from the ongoing dialogue, I'm going to be selective about what I delegate to each of them such that their jobs are growing more in that ideal job realm, the intersection of the 3 things.
Right.
And I'm going to inform them, be aware, this isn't just busy work. This isn't some task I invented. This is coming off of my own plate. As the manager. You are now doing higher level work. I'm grateful to you for taking this off my plate. I'm going to support you until you feel comfortable doing it on a recurring basis. it is something the business needs. Look at how you're developing. Guess what? Like, you've just gotten more value out of your employees and they're thanking you for it.
Right.
It is win-win. It's man bites dog, right? Because managers think they have to apologize when they're giving more work to their employees. Quite the opposite.
Right. Right. You touched on something in the book that was interesting. It's compensation, coaching, conflict, and performance management. How should modern companies rethink these systems to reflect today's workforce values?
Give me that list again, Joshua. Performance management, compensation.
Yeah, it's compensation, coaching, conflict, and performance management.
All right, I'll do my best at keeping it short enough to remain interesting, but love chatting about all these things.
Right.
Compensation. Sometimes there are some misconceptions about compensation. Compensation is, if we think of salary, right? Compensation, salary is paying a fair amount for a commodity. And not to be shrewd about it, but our talent is essentially a commodity because there is a marketplace for it and there's a fair price for it, given what people's, capabilities are, what their experience is, where they are geographically, what industry they're in, what size company they're going to work for. Compensation should be benchmarked, and salary should be seen as the price for a good, right? The fair market value we learn in business school is what a willing buyer will pay a willing seller. Right. That salary, changes over time simply because the cost of labor, not cost of living, we pay cost of labor, but the cost of labor does increase over time with inflation and with competition. And we should be aware for each of the jobs in our company how those salaries are changing. And if you think of the marketplace being sort of like a train, that train is always going forward. You have to increase people's salaries, otherwise you fall behind the market, and eventually they have a financial incentive to leave because someone will pay them significantly more than you're paying them. If the employees are developing, right, you're able to stretch them through developmental delegation, they're learning new things, they're doing more things for the company, they're becoming more valuable. That is like the employees are walking forward on the moving train. So the train is the marketplace, and the employees' growth is their own motion on the train. And so if the market moves 2% in a given year, but the employee has grown, then a 2% salary budget or 2% increase is not keeping up with that commodity's increasing value. We should be aware of both those things, both of those forward motions. So I'll say that as compensation. Whereas salary is sort of like the guaranteed compensation, that's what our employees can borrow against at the bank, right? Something like a short-term incentive, like a bonus, is more of a retrospective thing. If an employee's had a good year, completed a project, that's not necessarily a time to give a salary increase unless that means they can, as a result of that experience, command more value for themselves in the marketplace. What it more likely is an opportunity to just give a short-term one-time incentive like a bonus to say, hey, this was great. If you do something great again like this in the future, you'll get another bonus, but it's not a guarantee. If there's a third leg of the stool, it would be the long-term incentive. That would be something more like a stock, shadow stock, or something with a retentive value. Not all companies have that, but if you do, that's more future-looking because of that retention hook element to that third kind of compensation feature. And that I would say, whereas bonus would be like, hey, you did this well retrospectively. Here's a one-time bonus to recognize you for it. That's kind of a retrospective performance reward. Somebody's potential is more an indication of their future value. That's where you use something like a stock RSU or shadow stock or something with a retentive value to reward their future value, to reward their potential. Conflict is another topic that we talk about among our managers.
Yep.
And, just as a soundbite, one of the things I love imparting to managers is not all conflict should be snuffed out. Not all conflict is bad.
Right.
Learn as managers, as facilitators of your teams and co-facilitators in an organization, learn what healthy conflict is versus unhealthy conflict. Healthy conflict is conflict where two people have a different point of view on how to solve a business problem, but they're approaching it in a substantive way. They're not calling each other names. They're not getting hot under the collar. It's not emotional. It's focused on the work. That's healthy conflict, and that's how we take advantage of diversity, diversity of perspective, diversity of ideas. It's why well-managed teams that can embrace differences come up with better solutions. Right. And to snuff out that kind of conflict is to squander the potential power of that diversity. Whereas unhealthy conflict is two people who are, beginning to get angry with each other, and it's no longer focused on the work, where the relationship can be put at risk. To recognize that kind of conflict and manage that out, try to resolve that, is to get everybody back to the work. So in our workshops, we talk about, what those two different types of conflicts look like, and approaches for harnessing the good kind and resolving the bad kind. Performance management is also referred to as progressive discipline in some contexts. And basically this is, to me, a recognition that managers owe employees a fair opportunity at success. And if an employee is not being successful, that employee is owed an awareness that he or she is not being successful. Progressive discipline is to ensure that if employees don't have great listening comprehension and they didn't get it when we told them they weren't being successful, we're going to follow up in writing and test whether their writing, their reading comprehension is better. And ultimately, to give people a chance and to know confidently at the end of a performance management exercise, if the employee is still not successful, that it's because they were unwilling or unable, but not unknowing. In that process, there's documentation going on as well that has the side benefit of protecting the company. If the employee were to claim, hey, I wasn't informed of this, nobody gave me a chance to be successful, and in fact, I think this was just unfair. I'm being singled out due to something. The performance management process with the documentation is a way for the company to go, no, we really did, try to make you aware of this and tried to help you be successful. Ultimately, you weren't. In a world in which you're having ongoing dialogues instead of formal performance reviews, especially for managers who are accustomed to formal performance reviews, there's sometimes a good question of, hey, without performance reviews, what if I want to manage someone out because they're an underperformer? Going to an ongoing dialogue style, which doesn't have performance ratings or formal performance reviews, does not actually hinder performance management. And in fact, even in a world where there are formal performance reviews and ratings, if a manager came to HR to say, I want to manage this low performer out, it doesn't matter what the performance review said or what the rating was. The progressive discipline performance management process would still be followed. And sometimes, frankly, in my experience, a manager will come and say, hey, I want to manage this low performer out. And I look at the performance review and rating, and just a month or two earlier, the employee seemed to be in great standing.
Right.
So the existence of that formal performance review process can actually do more harm than good when it comes to following a performance management process, in order to give an employee a fair chance to succeed and also to take the necessary preparatory steps to manage someone out if they're ultimately not successful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the performance management stance. I think, from a optimal performance standpoint and how you get there, it's triggered by engagement, not excessive performance reviews. I look at performance reviews similarly to how I looked at traditional HR, right? It's meant to protect the business, not help improve or protect the employee or help, from a career development standpoint. It's not meant to help, reinforce, those good behaviors to keep them on track for their career, but it's more of like, oh, got you there. You didn't have X, Y, and Z by X, Y, and Z date, so now I can, find a way to replace you or find a way to, fire you or whatever have you. But yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Let's talk succession planning and workforce planning.
Sure.
Yeah. So two topics that are often neglected until it's too late. How should leaders proactively, approach that?
Succession planning. Sometimes the most lucid organizations avoid succession planning because there's sort of an awareness that it isn't exactly what it presents as. To list someone as a successor often has sort of an associated question of when could this person reasonably succeed his or her leader? And they're like, 1 to 3 years or 3 or 4 years from now or something like that. I don't really believe in that kind of succession plan. And frankly, I also don't think that succession plan, when captured, ever really plays out in the way it's implied, right? As it's ostensibly intended. So, the leader goes, here's my 2 weeks notice. I just won the lottery. Boy, we don't know who's going to succeed this person. We better pull out the dusty succession plan that we wrote down 3 months ago and actually see what our plan was. It's silly, right? It's fatuous. That's not how it goes. And to say like, oh, this person is, ready to succeed me in 3 years, that would imply that I'm static for those 3 years. But the fact is, 3 years from now, I'm 3 years further ahead. I know 3 years more than I know today. I have 3 years more experience. My relationships are 3 years stronger. And the person who is listed as my successor is still 3 years out from being ready to succeed me. I think succession planning is a very valuable exercise, but here's how I describe it. It is a capture of the strength of your bench. And if you see that the quote unquote successors are 10 years out versus 2 years out, what you are indicating there is a weaker bench. And a stronger bench makes an organization more scalable. It makes the leadership teams more robust. I don't believe in true redundancy. So somebody who's like a ready now successor, well, that implies to me like we're paying too much for talent on that team. I don't need somebody who's ready now. It's okay that a direct report is a few years behind his or her leader. What I'd like, though, is that the direct report isn't 15 years behind the leader, because that means that leader has to bridge a larger gap of seniority, and likely means that that leader has to dive further down into the details of the organization, which makes that leader less scalable. A stronger bench makes that leader more scalable. A more scalable leader turns into, in turn, right, a more scalable executive above that leader. So traditionally, succession plan tables will have rows like ready now, ready 1 to 3 years, ready 4 to 5 years, and anybody who's more than 5 years out doesn't make it on the table. That tends to encourage fiction to be captured in the table. In order for there to be names in the table, you see a lot of people who are listed as 4 to 5 years out or 1 to 3 years out, but it's really not true. It's more like they're 7 years out. And by 7 years out, again, the way I describe that is it's not that 7 years from now they're ready to replace the person above them, because that person above them is going to continue growing himself or herself. More like, ask that leader, how many years ago were you where this person on your succession table is now? So that you have an honest answer, and wipe out those labels on the table, ready now, 1 to 3 years. Just capture your next most influential person, list that name, and then capture a parenthetical note on the number of years ago you were where that person is now. And if those numbers are really big numbers, you've got a weak bench. You might even need to hire some people with a bit more seasoning so that you don't have to dive down as the leader so much in the details of your organization. If those numbers are, I was where that direct report of mine is now about 2 years ago, about 4 years ago. Those are reasonable numbers. That feels like a reasonably a bench strength that's in kind of a healthy zone. So I think succession planning is a little bit of a misnomer, but it's still a tremendously valuable exercise at gauging bench strength in an organization, which is essentially a measure of scalability.
Yeah. And I'm glad you touched on scalability. Just within your experience, what distinguishes companies that scale smart from those that scale recklessly?
One of the most inefficient ways to scale an organization is to simply throw bodies at a growing business. Instead, and what employee engagement survey data shows us, employees would rather not have more teammates added, but rather be scaled themselves as individuals. And again, through the ongoing dialogue exercise, developmental delegation, developing employees, growing them, stretching them, supporting them through their growth, you are engaging those employees because a sense of career development, a sense of future, a sense of growth is always a strong driver of employee engagement. If you scale by adding bodies, employees feel less critical to the organization. They feel more redundant. That actually subtracts from their engagement. So you add bodies, but you get less from each body in the team versus our business is growing and we have to step up ourselves as individuals. Let's be more valuable. Let's stretch and become more valuable in that way. And in turn, as the business grows, it can turn around and show more value to us with higher wages or higher bonuses. Smart scalability to me is leaving additional headcount, leaving additional bodies as the last resort in how to scale a growing business. Instead, more efficient and a way to drive more employee engagement, more commitment, more passion among the employee base is to get as much as possible out of the existing individuals by supporting their growth.
Right. I mean, I would also argue that it's more cost effective too, right? Like the opportunity cost not only for hiring, but then,
the salaries.
The salaries, then having to replace them when you could have just upskilled your current talent and, been a lot more effective and efficient. So
absolutely.
How have, workplace design and space evolved in meaning, especially with the rise of like remote work?
This is I don't know that the dinner party where this topic would come up would be the most fun dinner party, but if it did, it could definitely come to blows. I have a bit of a traditional attitude toward in-person versus remote work. And so I end up kind of adopting a stance in this debate that gets some arrows, thrown at it, and probably rightfully so.
Yeah, this is like the red or blue kind of conversation.
Yeah. Remote work is a reality, and some talent, cannot be in person if you're going to have them on the team. Constraints abound, and perhaps it's unrealistic to say everyone in person all the time, same working hours. There's a simplicity to it. There's a strength to it. There's a reassurance to everyone being in the same place. What I particularly cling to is the opportunity for everyone to get on a whiteboard together, share the collection of whiteboard pens, collide at the coffee maker, share ideas in passing, just to know someone isn't on vacation because he or she's at the desk, and to be able to go up to that person and be like, I had an idea in the shower this morning, and I've got a free minute. Can I share it with you? Can we talk about it? There is an accessibility advantage to all being co-located that I think can be, one can live without, an organization can live without, but there isn't a true substitute for it. And so the relationship building, the availability of body language, there are some, tangible and intangible advantages to all being in the same place, such that I would, at the very least, in losing this debate, which I often do, but in losing this debate, I would simply call out some appreciation for those things that are ideal about all being in the same room or same place, and to not give them up without a fight. If it's a concession that one has to make, that the team is sometimes remote or partly remote, or there's a remote individual by exception, yeah, let's be practical. However, the ideal in my mind, for the sake of the collisions, the idea pollination, the knowing who's online or on work time versus not on work time, being able to get at a whiteboard together, being able to draw on a piece of paper. Again, it probably makes me sound like an analog person in a digital world, but there are some advantages that I just think are worthwhile when you don't have to compromise too much for them.
Yeah, I agree once again, but I'm a little biased, and I think it's either that the athlete, high level competitor in me that's played on high level teams that understand the camaraderie, the teamwork, those nuances you can't really get if you're in isolation, but you can get work done. So that's where I'm a little diplomatic, where I'm like, well, but both sides can work. But yeah, I'll be remiss not to ask before we close, what are some values or principles that you live by, or is there a favorite quote that comes to mind?
Tough for me to select just one. When someone has said something and said it well, it is said that one should have no scruples, take it and copy it down. I have a couple of quotes in the book. In fact, I try to open all the chapters with a quote or two. One of them is, never cut what you can untie. And that is my reminder to managers: don't overcomplicate things. Like, simplicity is scalable, simplicity is strong, but the simple, we were at a past employer, one of our adages was that the simple is more difficult than the complex. Blaise Pascal said, I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead. Take the time to try to simplify things, but recognize that simple comes at an effort, not the other way around. And then, I also sort of attach to, there's a fine line between you can't do that and I wish I had thought of that. And I really enjoy encountering people who are willing to set convention or norms aside in order to strive for something that's even better than best practice. Best practices are rarely discovered by following best practices. You have to think out of the box. You have to think with clear eyes and a clean sheet of paper and challenge the norms in order to come up with those new, better solutions that nobody's ever thought of before. So thanks for that question. That was fun to indulge in.
I mean, wow, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. From organizational energy to effective leadership and everything in between, this conversation was, full of practical wisdom and ultimately deep insight. For anyone looking to deep dive into his work, please check out Michael's book, Building Better Workplaces. It is full with insight, sort of like what we shared here, but it even gets it more deeper and more practical than the time that we have here on this call. Wow, I'm just I'm floored by the insight and like being able to continue to dive deeper into this book, and having you as someone that I can also lean on as a resource in this space has been truly remarkable. It is like I'm literally lost for words, because I just feel like I'm like a sponge soaking it all in myself and trying to process it, but at the same time being like, man, I align with that, and it's incredible to get this chance to learn from you and utilize this platform for you to cascade your message to others. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a colleague or a leader who could use a fresh take on building better workplaces. Until next time, thanks for listening.
It was another good day. We had another good day. And if you line up enough good days, fuck around, have a good life.